Good morning, everybody. We'll just give it a few seconds to make sure that we've got everybody joining us that want to join, and then we'll go straight into the webinar. So bear with us for just perhaps 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll start. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience while everybody joins. Good morning, everybody. I have to say, very happily from a sunny London, which is very nice to see. Welcome to the LaingBuisson Retirement Housing UK Market Report launch. This webinar is set for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and I hope that you'll be able to be with us for the duration. Many of you know me already. My name is Ian Locke. And I head the healthcare division at Avison Young, a practice covering valuation agency and consultancy, along with other Avison Young practice disciplines such as building, planning, and so on, across the UK. And my team is experienced in all areas of healthcare properties and businesses. I have a particular personal and professional interest in the housing with care sector, something that I've been working in and looking at for over 20 years now, and something which I find a very compelling sector as the way for elderly people to live in later life. And for that reason, I'm very pleased that we've been able to sponsor the research for LaingBuisson and to present the report to you today. I think it's very timely that this research is presented. We are seeing many more investors following the pandemic looking at the sector, and this sort of research is absolutely what's needed to allow people to understand what this sector is really all about. I have with me today Steve Secker, the author of the research and the owner of the specialist retirement housing and development consultancy Secker Taylor Associates. Steve was first involved in the retirement housing sector in 1989 as an auditor with Ernst & Young, and joined McCarthy & Stone in 1993, spending 25 years with them, 13 of those as managing director of the North and the Northeast regions. I'll hand over to Steve in a few moments so that he can present his research to you in detail. But before I do, we also have with us, I'm very pleased to say, Honor Barrett, Managing Director of Birchgrove. Birchgrove is the pioneer of the full rental model in the assisted living sector in the UK, and it's a much watched organisation and model because many investors and operators would like to create a greater rental sector within assisted living. Birchgrove currently has 7 schemes around the M25, and Honor will be able to tell you more, but their ambitions are to go much wider than that once they've established themselves in that geography. And we also have with us Nigel Sibley, the chairman of Revere Life, which is a relative newcomer as an organisation to the sector, but has been formed by a number of senior living professionals to bring a new model into the marketplace. Nigel also has significant experience and valuable perceptions for us to hear in relation to senior living in the UK as a former MD of McCarthy & Stone and also as former CEO of Life Care Residences. Nigel and Honor are much better placed than I, so I will invite them after Steve's presentation to just say a little bit about themselves and their organisation before we go into the question and answer session. You all have the opportunity to join the question and answer session, and if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A button on your screens. If you ask a question and you're happy to present that question live yourself, then please add your name to it, and I will do my very best to bring you in to ask the questions during the debate live. If you would rather the question is put by me to the panel, then please write the question anonymously, and that will indicate to me that I can put the question on your behalf. For those that do join the debate, if I have to move things on because we're limited on time, please don't take that as rudeness on my part. That's just me trying to get as much into the hour and a quarter as we possibly can. The session is being recorded, and you will be sent an invitation to access that later if you would like to do, but obviously I would like you all to be here with us for the full hour and a quarter if you can make it. I don't think I need to say any more at this time. I will come back on and give you some of my perceptions of the marketplace from the on-the-ground work that we do at Avison Young. But before I do that, perhaps, Steve, if I may, I'll invite you in and you can present your research. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ian. It's a great pleasure to be part of this webinar and to present the findings from the second edition of the LaingBuisson Retirement Housing Report. Okay, so moving into the slides. The next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, I think any presentation at the moment, it's incumbent upon us to recognise this extreme amount of change that's going on in the world. When I was writing the report, it was in the context of a world coming to live with COVID, and of course, very recent events with the war in Ukraine remind us of the horrors of things happening that putting into context anything happening in our own lives. Nevertheless, a lot of change is going on at the moment, and how this plays out in the wider economy and housing market, but also in the retirement housing market will be interesting to see the impacts of inflation, the cost of living crisis, the economy, and how that's playing out with labour shortages, both in the construction side of things and material shortages, building cost increases, also labour shortages in the market for care and service workers. So I think it will be fascinating to see how business models change and adapt to all these factors. And then, of course, we've got the whole climate change and ESG agenda also having a big impact on costs and the technology that we'll be using in the developments. Technology also has another role to play because hitherto, I think data and insight have been somewhat lacking in the sector, but increasingly we're getting more and more data about customers, about what they want, and the ability to process that and really give good insight is going to be fascinating as well. So moving on to our report, we are, I think, one of the few reports that looks at the whole of the retirement housing market and is able, therefore, authoritatively to put things into context. So what I've set out on this slide is some of our definitions. There are many terms that are used to describe the world of retirement housing, later living, senior living. The terms we use the phrase housing with care to refer to the part of the market where there is generally 24/7 care provided, support provided on schemes with high level of services. We use the phrase age exclusive downsizer housing for those schemes where there is very limited services, no care, but there is an age restriction and a design that ethos which purposes it for the older housing market. And then the middle part, which is actually the largest by volume, something like 68% of the units are in the retirement living sector, which is probably the longest standing part of the market. It's what people perhaps most typically think of in terms of retirement housing, where there is no care provided. The services are on site, typically overseen by a warden or house manager. The housing with care is undoubtedly the fastest growing part of the market. It represents about 12% of the installed stock, but something like 60% of the new build. So very much this is the coming part of the market, as Ian was alluding to in his introduction. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Those of us working in the sector, it really feels as if we've got some momentum gathering and lots of new operators and such like happening. But if we look at the long run of history, actually the delivery rates in recent years almost take us back to the 1960s, which is quite stark in reality. We're at a fraction of the peak that we saw in the late 80s when I was starting my journey in the retirement housing sector. And in recent years, we've been averaging around 7,000 new units per annum of new build. And this has dipped during the last couple of years, probably as a result of COVID, to around about 5,000 to 6,000 units, although those figures may be revised up slightly. But as you can see, very small volumes in the context of the wider market. If then we look in more detail, the next slide, at the 10-year split here. So the largest proportion, as I've said, of the market is the retirement living market, and something like 76% of those units are in the social landlord sector. So they're affordable rented units. 24% is in the private sale market. Those proportions vary slightly across each of the different segments, with the housing with care showing the greatest proportion of private ownership at 28%. And all these percentages have increased upwards by 1 or 2% over the last couple of years, as more of the new stock has been in the private pay part of the market, with a reduction in the amount of social housing delivery. I think it's worth highlighting in terms of the volume of the social housing stock. A lot of that does date back to the 60s, 70s and 80s, and it's not likely to have been built to standards that we would see now in the marketplace. So particularly as we take account over the next 20 or so years of the move to net carbon, it will be interesting to see how social landlords, what changes could be made to ensure that that stock is still fit for purpose. What I do expect to see, and we're seeing some signs of this, is age exclusive units, retirement living units actually taken out of service, particularly by local authorities, and repurposed for general needs housing, or rebuilt perhaps as extra care schemes where the sites are large enough. Okay, moving on to look at some of the demographic and other trends that influence the backdrop to the sector. So a couple of charts here looking at the growth in the older population. These charts are looking at the English numbers, so they'll be higher for the UK as a whole. But what we want to focus in on is the number of households that are headed by an older person as the sort of key part of the market that could be making the move to a specialist unit. So you can see from the bar chart some of the big increases that we're going to see over the next 25 years. What I'd like to home in on the next slide, though, if we look at the middle couple of columns here, is the number of new households per annum that are going to be formed over the next 25 years. So for the whole of England, something like 150,000 new households per annum, but almost all of that growth is in households headed by somebody over the age of 55, and 70% of that growth, over 100,000 homes. You can see the red circle around the couple of numbers in the middle of the chart there. 104,000 new households each year for the next 25 years will be over the age of 75. So one could look at these numbers and say, why are we bothering to talk about building new starter and family homes when so much of the growth is in this the older people's segment of the market? I'm not suggesting that we don't build new homes for the whole of the market, but what I am pointing to is the big numbers coming through in this part of the market. And I know people often question, do we need more older people's housing? I come back to this data time and again when in those sorts of debates. Of course, it's not just about the number of people and households. It's also about their ability to pay, particularly in the private sale part of the market. So I've got a couple of slides here, one looking at the income level. What we saw for about 20 years up to 2016 is quite rapidly increasing levels of income for pensioner households. But that has really stalled over the last 5 years. The various impacts have coming through here, but I think what we're starting to see is people retiring without the benefits of index-linked pensions. So we've got to be conscious of this, particularly in the context of things like service charges and the cost of living squeeze with ever higher energy costs, etc., that we're seeing at the moment. On a more positive side, from the ability to pay, household wealth has shown big increases, largely because of the rise in house prices, which of course has continued over the last year or so. So something like 45% of UK or Great British households headed by somebody over 65 have housing equity over 250,000, which we've used as a proxy for the ability to purchase a unit in the private sale part of the market. So that points to some pretty big numbers in terms of availability, and we'll put them in some more context later on. But I think one of the other things I wanted to highlight here, though, is notwithstanding those large numbers who can afford, there's equally, in fact, even larger numbers of people without the equity to afford the private pay part of the market. So people owning their own houses, but with something 100, 125,000 of equity, are not going to be able to purchase a unit, a full price unit anyway. They may be able to purchase on shared ownership, and something like 20% of the market don't own their own home. So this is pointing to the demand in the social housing part of the market, of course, and there is, I think, has been said many times, a large mass market which is effectively underserved, isn't able to afford the private pay part of the market, but equally is probably not qualifying for the social housing part of the market. And then moving on, just looking at reasons for moving, and this is some research that ARCO did with Promatura a couple of years ago. If you look at the bars towards the left-hand side of each of those charts, so the yellow and silver colours, those are the older purchasers within, they're all over the age of 50 on this bar chart. What we see is the increasing importance of health and moving for more suitable housing and nearer to family and friends being the trends that are encouraging older occupiers to move. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that something like only 1.8% of the over 75s move each year. So, what can we do to encourage people to move, to overcome some of the barriers and that are perceived to moving? It is one of the most stressful things people do in their lives, and it is incumbent on all operators to see what we can do to encourage people to move and take up the advantages that to health and well-being from those moves. What we are seeing increasingly is the diversity of offering, and our panelists here today represent some of that diversity, with the increasing number of rental offerings, whether it's the Birchgrove fully rented model or other operators offering rental as one of a suite of options to allow people to take occupation of their schemes. Shared ownership is starting to come through. It's existed within the social housing market. We're now starting to see it come through within some of the private developers offering shared ownership, and those multi-tenure models where sort of, if you want to move here, what's the best model to help you move to our scheme is an increasingly important part of the mix. Not exclusively, still many operators working on one tenure model. And I think the important thing here is that choice is important. The older people's housing market needs to reflect the wide diversity within the older population. So choice is great, but choice and lots of different offerings could lead to more confusion. So how do we make sure that everybody understands the different offerings, that there's good consumer protection and transparency in place to enable that to happen? One of the other changes that we're starting to see increasingly in the retirement housing market, particularly the housing with care segment, is in the increasing rise of deferred management fees, event fees, a number of different terms, again, used to describe payments which are made when people cease to utilise the apartment. So we're seeing more operators using these. We're seeing an increasing range of these percentages, with a number of operators reporting that they are pushing those percentages up. And customers like the idea of that. So that's almost this buy now, pay later mentality coming through. It's a good way of allowing customers certainty around some of the costs involved with ownership and occupation of retirement housing, with the cost then picked up at the end of their occupation. Look at some of the other data that we've got within the report. We analyse quite extensively who does what, where, over what time scale. So I've just pulled out one of the charts we've got in the report here, which looks at the top 10 developers over the last 5 years. What will clearly stand out, I'm sure, is McCarthy & Stone at the top of that chart. It's something like a third of the overall delivery we've seen over the last 5 years. Churchill is the second largest developer, followed by Lifestory with their Pegasus and Renaissance brands. So those three operators are traditionally the retirement living sector, although McCarthy & Stone, of course, operate across all three segments, particularly housing with care as well. We then have a number of operators, some within the social housing sector, so Extra Care Charitable Trust, Housing 21, for example, and some of the larger retirement village operators starting to come through with the likes of Audley there. There's some perhaps notable names that people will know within the industry, like Inspired Villages, not showing up there. And I think this points to the time lag between schemes coming through and when they show through in the data, in terms of actually being delivered and occupied. It takes many years to get planning and build a large retirement village scheme. So that might be why some names you might expect to see there perhaps aren't showing through just yet. But I suspect we'll see some big changes with the new entrants into the sector over the coming years. And then looking at the level of market penetration. Now, the percentages we've got on this chart might be higher than you're perhaps used to hearing from some other reports on the sector. Now, there are probably two things to highlight here. One is we look at this very much on the households, as I've mentioned already, rather than the numbers of older people, because we feel it's right to do that on the basis that it's a household that will make a move to a specialist unit of retirement accommodation. And also we've analysed the whole of market across the three segments as shown on the table, and looking at it in relation to the over 65 as well as over 75 households. So what again stands out here, I think, is the high weighting towards the social, affordable, rented part of the market, with relatively low percentages for the private sales part of the market, and again the much lower percentages occupied within the housing with care segment, where the greatest need is coming through in terms of the growth of the older population. Going to drill into these in a bit more detail on the next couple of slides. So this first slide looks at the whole of the retirement housing market and just breaks out on those pie charts between the whole of the population, how many are over the age of 65 of those, how many are living in specialist accommodation, and then on the bottom segment within the grey box, we've looked at the private sales part of the market. Now, I appreciate that may not be very easy to read all the detail on there, but the slides will be available afterwards. What I'm sure you can see is that that blue sliver is a very small proportion of the overall potential market there, showing that, and that's based on those with housing equity over 250,000. So there really is a big market to go at there. On the next slide, we've then done the same analysis, but looking exclusively at the housing with care part of the market. And this time we're focusing in on the over 75 households. So again, just same analysis, as I say, total population, how many over 75, how many are living in specialist accommodation, and then the box at the bottom with the orange circle and the tiny blue sliver, showing that only 1.4% of those with housing equity over 250,000 who are over the age of 75 are living in specialist accommodation. So very limited existing supply in that part of the market. It would be remiss in any presentation talking about retirement housing not to pick up on some of the initiatives that are going on with government at the moment. And I think for a long time, the sector has been banging on the door of government to try and get recognition for the great work that we do. And it's good to see that that does seem to be being recognised. So we've had recently 3 white papers, the care white paper, the integration white paper, and the levelling up white paper, all making references to housing with care and the opportunities there for the future. So I think that's really good to see. The task force referenced again at the House of Lords, I think it was only last week. So we look forward to the announcement on who's going to be involved with that and its remit. I think high hopes resting on it. I do hope that those will be fulfilled and this will help with the future of the sector. I think just mention briefly the care cost reform and the clarity around that. I mean, that's I know there's a lot of controversy around the government's reform of care costs, and it certainly probably hasn't answered everybody's requests from the care sector. There are some big issues there, but ultimately the fact there is some now clarity of funding, I think, will help the housing with care part of the market, because it should put to rest concerns about if I move to a housing with care, am I reducing my ability to access government funding for my care costs? So I think that should be good news, because ultimately housing with care is a good way of for those that make the move, but also a good way for the whole of society to help reduce the costs of care, which are a major burden on the future economy of the UK. We've done a bit of analysis looking at there's a care homes and housing with care sector. So this is analysis shared between the LaingBuisson Care Homes for Older People report and this retirement housing report. So what we have here is the purple charts are the level of care home residents. So you can see that has been sort of declining stroke broadly flat over the last 20 or so, 30 or so years. The dip in 2020-21 was because of COVID related occupancy issues, but that is starting to come back. The orange bars are the number of residents within housing with care schemes. That's, as you can see, is steadily marching up as more new units are delivered. We've added those together and then analyze that against the growth in the older population, that silver dashed line, grey dashed line across the scheme. So you can see that the population is growing faster than the growth in the combination of housing with care and care home beds. So again, really pointing to the opportunity there is in that part of the market to grow supply, because the demand is there. Okay, and then where do we see the potential for the market going? Well, we've done a number of scenarios. A sort of pessimistic scenario which says, what if the stock only grows at the rate of the population growth? On the basis we've got a very low level of existing stock. Of course, it doesn't grow that fast, but that's broadly similar to the rates of delivery over the last couple of years. That's the green line at the bottom. And we've done an optimistic scenario where we looked at what level of market penetration, what area has the highest level of penetration within the UK, and it's Somerset, where we see something like 7.5% of the over 75 households live in specialist housing with care. If we could achieve that same level across the whole of the UK, we would have 403,000 units. Somewhat, to say that's probably the optimistic scenario. To achieve that over the next 10 years would really take some doing. Perhaps more realistically, if the whole of the UK could achieve the level that's been achieved by the West Midlands, which is 3.5% of over 75s living in specialist housing with care, we would be more than doubling the supply of housing with care over the next 10 years. to 188,000. That would require quite a steep increase in the level of new build rates. But given the new entrants we're seeing into the sector, and if the positive government initiatives we've talked about come through, then we think there's a really good case for why that could be achieved. So the report is just in the final throes of production at the moment, so it'll be available shortly. But you can go onto the LaingBuisson website or contact the sales team. The details are on the screen there, and purchase a copy. So, thank you very much.
Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. I was listening intently and ended up scribbling an awful lot of things down. So there will be lots of questions to come, I'm sure. But my mind, while I was scribbling down, was very much going to how those areas of research you've highlighted actually manifest themselves on the ground, which is where we are every day, looking at schemes and so on. And there's some really interesting highlights there that I just put down. The number of sites coming through and 7,000 units that you've talked about feels like very, very little, as you summed up with Somerset and West Midlands, and and I think there are reasons for that I'll come back to, the constraints as to why we're only seeing that number come forward. I think really interesting as well that nearly all the growth in households in the elderly sector is going to be the 75 pluses, and you can see that in demographic numbers as well. Of course, that all of those people that are 65 to 74 at the moment, many of those are going to end up in that bracket, and that's where there's a real lump of population that needs additional housing. I was fascinated by only 17% of the over 65s have equity of over 500,000. And whilst the retirement living sector overall has been very good at providing housing, probably from, I don't know, £200,000 per property upwards, the housing with care sector, the private housing with care sector, is very much in the £400,000 plus position, which suggests that the housing with care private sector at the moment really is targeting just that 17%. And we've got to look at ways of opening that up to those with 250,000+ of equity, not just those with over 500,000 of equity. The 1.8% per annum of over 75s that move per year, we'll come back to that as well, because I think there are real questions around why it is that so few people over that age are moving, and I think that's pivotal to how this market moves forward over time. And I liked your examples of Somerset and West Midlands, and that if we got to the 3.5% that West Midlands have achieved, we'll be doing well. And I think for me, that's the difference between an aspiration of where we might be able to get to coming off such a low base versus actually what the need is. And I don't think we ought to confuse the two. In my view, the need is very much greater than that 3.5. And whilst it would be great to get to that number, we still, in my view, we won't be satisfying the need for retirement housing and housing with care if we get that far. So I'm going to question Nigel and Honor on some of that in a minute, but in terms of how some of that manifests itself in the marketplace today, I think it's really important. First of all, I think to say that whilst we are looking at some very significant strains and some things which need explaining, there is no doubt that we do have in the UK now some excellent examples of retirement housing and retirement housing with care that anybody that's interested in this sector really should go and have a look at the quality that's being delivered, look at the wraparound services and facilities that are available. And I think anybody would be convinced that for very many people, this is a style of living in older age, which is very suitable and aspirational. And I think we should start with that positive, but then we come on very quickly, as I often do, to the constraints and the difficulties that the sector have. And what we're seeing in the market at the moment, we're seeing a great deal of new investor interest coming to this sector, as you've highlighted, Steve. Some of that doesn't understand the sector yet. Some of it will probably never invest in the sector, but little by little more are. Many of those investors come to it having been in or looked at the other, what I might call the beds sectors, so hotels and student, and also the build to rent sector, because there may be a resonance between that and the rental model. So they come at it looking at it from that direction, but there are clearly nuances within this sector. And I want to talk with Nigel, particularly about the sale model and deferred management fee, with Honor about rentals. And I think, if we can spend a moment or two, maybe on shared ownership, which you highlighted as well, Steve, I think that will be useful, because that could break open that more middle market ground of those with less than £500,000 of equity, but still want to have this product. And we are seeing more shared ownership discussions ongoing at the present time, and people studying the general housing shared ownership market and looking at what staircasing means. Is it reverse staircasing in this sector compared with the general housing market, and so on. So some really interesting conversations going on in the marketplace in those sectors. In terms of development, it is hugely frustrating. Sites, appropriate sites, are very hard to find. And even when operators feel that they've got an appropriate site, planners sometimes don't think it's an appropriate site. And so development and planning to some degree are going hand in hand there. The build cost issue is massive at the moment. That is in a position at the present time where it is becoming really hard to deliver anything other than very upmarket schemes where you can sell out at £500 per square foot, because build costs have gone massively. And I always do this. I take sales prices off price per square foot, and I end up talking about build cost off price per square meter. So forgive me, but where we were talking maybe £2,100 to £2,300 per square meter for construction cost, we're now looking at 2.5, 2.6, and in some instances more than that for the very highest quality. And that really is wiping away either developer profit, or it's wiping away land value. And I think we're being pushed at the moment into a position where other competing land uses will win the day if we're not careful. And that could push this sector back to having to deal with sites where residential development, for example, can't get a planning consent, where you've got difficult listed buildings that maybe this sector can deal with in one way or another using communal facilities that others can't. And that would be a retrograde step for this sector, and it won't help to push the sector forward as fast as we'd like to see it go. And I mentioned planning, and I think it is extraordinary, but I think it was about funding and economics that we have something like I think, Steve, you said 72% of extra care is social and 28% is private. Yet we know that 80% of the population falls into the private market and only 20% into the social. So we have something like 72% of the accommodation serving 20% of the population and 28% serving 80%. And even if we could get near parity on that in the private market, we would have gone an awful long way to a prevalence rate which is much more suitable for what we're seeing in the demographic pressures. And I think it would be very helpful in the planning arena if local plans would zone for C2, would zone for retirement and extra care housing, so that it doesn't have to compete with residential and other uses. And I think it is, as Steve says, I think it is just as appropriate as affordable housing, and no one would suggest that we don't need more affordable housing, but we do desperately need housing models for older persons, older people as well. And I think with the planning system as well, we need to look very hard. I've recently been in a planning inquiry on a need assessment for retirement living, and I do think the planning system is using models of measuring need, which are potentially outdated and which really aren't giving the right answer. I think that needs looking at, and I think the whole viability assessment question, which we're doing a lot more work in now, where local authorities want full or as much as they can of affordable content or affordable contribution towards affordable housing, which is really hitting this sector hard when build costs are very high for the operational requirements, and where you've got a much lesser sale proportion to gross development because of the communal facilities. Those things are putting huge stress on this sector, and we need to get a grip of those things. So all of that is constraint that I'm seeing in the marketplace. We were very lucky to be able to put a number of consented sites in the market over the last year, which as you can imagine, have huge interest because they're consented, because they don't have affordable attaching. In many instances, and I haven't mentioned community infrastructure level SIL, but SIL is something else which is being applied in some areas as well, putting more constraint and more difficulty within viability. It's very hard for all of those reasons, put my valuer hat on, it's very hard to be able to give any generalization as to what a site is worth. They really are valued on a one-by-one basis at the present time. There is no such thing as price per acre within this sector. So it's very hard for anybody to just get an immediate feel for what land value might look like. And we still see through all of the work that we do that there is there's a real difficulty with speed of sales in the sector, and I want to talk a little bit about sales and marketing and about how we raise the education and how we raise the awareness of this as appropriate accommodation for people, which may be a real sticking point as to why people don't move. So between all of that research and what we're seeing in the marketplace, I think that all makes a lot of sense. As to what is happening in the market and why it's happening, but two people who are on the ground with this, doing these developments, developing these businesses are Nigel and Honor. So if both of those would please liven up their cameras, that would be lovely, and unmute themselves. And we'll start some sort of question and answers. And please, can I just remind everybody to put in your questions, and we'll bring you in if you give us your name, if you would like to be brought in, if you want to do it anonymously. I'll try to ask those questions as we go through. So do that now if you would, and I've got the screen open so I can see those questions coming in. But first, while we're doing that, Nigel, can I come to you maybe first and just ask you, please, would you just give 1 minute on yourself and on Revere and on just where you're positioning yourself in the sector, so that when we're in discussion, people will know at what angle you're coming at this sector from.
Yes, certainly. And thanks, Steve, for a very good report and a good summary of it. I think it makes great reading. Yeah, I mean, my background, as Ian said, was both through McCarthy and Stone and life care residences. So, I've got sort of practical experience in two of the three sectors that the report analyses. Revere is a startup company that I'm supporting in a sort of non-executive chairman role. Because I believe in the sector and the need that we clearly have, and our platform is very much to create environments in which our homeowners could age in place. So we will be offering the full spectrum of hospitality care and nursing services on site, so that someone's last move really can be, barring exceptional circumstances, the final move. And when you look at the data, it's the 75 plus market who have a need to downsize, be in more appropriate accommodation, future-proof themselves for their anticipated and sad, and in some cases likely, care and nursing needs. And that does two things. One is, I think it fundamentally meets a deep need within that market segment, but also it creates a commercially strong platform that investors want to support. So that's where Revere is going.
Great, thank you. And Honor, could I invite you to do the same? Would you just talk a little moment about yourself, where you come at this sector from, and your model?
Yes, absolutely. Ian, we at Birchgrove, we we were the first rental model, probably one of the first for assisted living, but now, of course, everybody's doing rental, which makes us completely overjoyed, because we feel it's absolutely the right thing to do. Beyond a certain age, renting in your retirement is absolutely the right thing to do. So we're overjoyed every time someone new signs up with us. We have 7 sites, as you pointed out. The last one is just in exchange at the moment with Knight Frank. And on January 1st, we went into a partnership with M&G, which we completely adore. They've committed 200 million to us over the next couple of years. We're spending it as fast as we can. And for our residents, it means that there's someone there with a really long time horizon to invest in these communities and keep the buildings as beautiful, you know, in fifth year as they were in the first year. So there's beautiful security that comes from being with M&G. And for us as a team at Birchgrove, it means that our growth is now sort of supercharged. There's just a weight of money behind us to push on and go faster. So actually our challenge is, you know, can we be as good as all the assets that we have? Can we be good enough? For us, the future now that everybody's in rental, now we're realizing that this building that I'm sitting in right now, it's 1 month short of its 3rd birthday, and the rental model is absolutely, you fill it up as fast as you can, and then it's about tenure. It's about getting to a 90%, 98% occupancy and then keeping it there. No voids, no one's ever allowed to die. So for us, it's about, can we prove that life in a Birchgrove neighbourhood makes you demonstrably happier, healthier, live longer? Can we prove to the likes of M&G that you can get to 98% occupancy and you can stay there by keeping everybody alive? And actually, nirvana for us is building the wait list. So the wait list is the things that means there's no tenure, there's no voids. So we can absolutely drive up the value of this business and therefore drive down the yields that the likes of M&G will pay for it. So what's interesting for me there is that weirdly our corporate goal is exactly the same as the goal of our residents. They want long, happy, healthy lives, and we want long, happy, healthy lives. Everybody is completely aligned. And for me, that's why the rental model is absolutely perfect.
Excellent, thank you. You both mentioned your funding there. There will be a lot of investors on this today. When you were out for funding, can you just give us any view on what the absolute, and I suspect you've got different types of funders because you've got different models. Can you perhaps just give us a feel for the must-haves from the investors, and whether you always felt that would align with your ethos and actually what you could potentially deliver? Maybe Honor, can I start with you on that? Yeah,
absolutely. We did go through quite an intense beauty parade. There were lots of bidders because there's not that many of us out there, and it was absolutely about the recurring revenue. It was about 30 years of guaranteed revenue, and the lumpiness of the for sale model, which didn't appeal to these particular investors, was not as valuable to them as this beautiful recurring RPI linked income. It felt like when we were in it, it felt like the shortage actually in the market was the operating teams. There was actually not that many of us for them to scrap over. And so value was absolutely driven by, you know, who's the operating team? Do we trust them? Are they a safe pair of hands? Do they know what they're doing? Are they cohesive as a team? So that was really interesting. And weirdly, the side effect of this is that we've kind of built a separate business there, which is an operating team, which has quite a good source of income over a long period of time, which we never really set out to do. And now it's like, oh gosh, you know, there's actually money in operating. M&G in particular were absolutely looking to mitigate any risks. They were not accepting of any, you know, they were so buttoned up. So they asked us to be better. Health and safety, the care had to be completely buttoned up. They wanted us to be absolutely rock solid because they just don't want to do the wrong thing. Data, they wanted certainty, and that's quite difficult with a business model like ours. It is really nascent. So we couldn't prove, oh, look what we've been doing for the last 15 years. There's none of that. But look what we've been doing, look what we know about our customers. So the data absolutely drove price. And then almost to a man, everybody wanted social impact. They absolutely believe in sustainability, doing the right thing. You can't be just lazy and just be a money-grabbing developer. You've got to do it right. So it was a really interesting alignment between the way we want to do business and what they were looking for.
Yeah, I mean that much of that is what we hear. And one of the things you said there, which is the operational platform, you know, that is big in the mind of investors from where I see this. And I guess, Nigel, you were reacting to that by creating a new operational platform, I guess. You know, in a market which probably has more investors than operational platforms. Would that be right?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Honor was saying about so many of the facets of what investors are looking for. But yeah, I think the number one is the operational platform. You know, there are very few established platforms in the UK to invest in. And at the end of the day, all of these businesses, whatever the tenure, are operating businesses with care and, you know, other compliance challenges. Which investors want to know they have got a management team that are going to be on top of that and create value. So, you know, our experience was looking for investors who had a real estate understanding, because it's important that they understand the vagaries of construction, planning, site finding, all those sort of things. Wanted, in our case, wanted to deploy capital and get it back with an acceptable return, but also understood the long-term recurring revenue benefits of the deferred fee model, which is our business, and had a enlightened view about where valuations of that type of income will go in time, where clearly at the moment, you know, Ian knows very well, is very poorly understood and poorly valued. You flip round the other side of the world and the valuation for this type of income is somewhere akin to ground rents, not quite that good, but you know, it's so for us and for our investors, a view about where those values will go over time. Honor absolutely mentions the lumpy nature of the for sale model with a deferred fee, and so the other thing the investors wanted was the ability to achieve some appropriate scale, and so that starts smoothing that out, so those are the main things that I think our investors were looking for.
Great, thank you. Steve, is there anything within the research that that you would pull out with regard to, you know, investor preferences or the paucity of operators? Is that showing through in the research?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think, as you referenced, it has been a period of record investment into the sector. The McCarthy Stone transaction, Birchgrave, the new entrant funding, any number of different funding sources. So there's a diversity there. That I'd echo the comments. The institutional emphasis is around the recurring income and how they can tap into those sources of income. ESG, again, that's been mentioned, but perhaps just mention around the debt side of that as well, I think is worth highlighting, as more debt funding is looking for ESG linkage and the opportunity, I think, there for the sector to sell that story better, to tap into some lower debt finance. It's not a massive saving, but as interest rates go up, that could become more important. And Homes England also as a source of funding. They're definitely, I think, woken up to the need to look at this, the specialist retirement housing sector. So the strategic partnership, the McCarthy Stone funding for Audley. So I think worth them being on people's radar.
Yeah, great, thank you. In fact, both Nigel and you, Steve, have mentioned things in what you said there, which have a resonance in a couple of questions that have come in, and the first of which is international comparison and what to learn. And Nigel, you mentioned the confidence that's shown in the long-term income approach of deferred management fees. But if Jonathan Burr is there and is willing to give his question, let's invite him in, and we'll have a fifth person on screen. Are you there, Jonathan?
Hi there. I'm not sure if I can do the video, but thanks for a fascinating presentation. My question is just, how does the UK compare to overseas markets? Where is the best performing market overseas, and what can we learn from that?
Steve, maybe start with you. Anything in the research which helps with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the data side of things, the New Zealand is always held up as the market with the most penetration for specialist housing with care type developments, and they've got the Retirement Villages Act, which I think underpins a lot of the growth that they've seen. So in terms of sort of learnings, I guess that's one of the potential learnings, and perhaps a hope and an aspiration as the task force forms from the government as to whether that could be part of what they're looking for. We've seen the US market has a higher rate of growth within what they would call assisted living, is what we would call housing with care in the report, and that has grown faster in the US than we've seen in the UK. We've got more retirement housing, the older forms that I referenced earlier in the report. So that's, I think, part of the picture. But as the demographics age, you know, we are going to need more of the specialist accommodation with care. Great, thanks.
Anything to add, Nigel? You've mentioned the deferred management fee model in other countries. I guess New Zealand is big on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the go-to place to look at housing with care on a for sale basis with a deferred fee is Australia and New Zealand. Life Care Residences is a New Zealand-owned company that has come to the UK. So that will show you how a market matures, not only in terms of investment and returns, but also in terms of the product design and delivery, but also the regulatory framework. The Retirement Villages Act, as Steve mentioned, in New Zealand was pivotal to the growth in that country, but also they have a different form of tenure with a sort of occupational rights agreement rather than a clunky leasehold. So in terms of rental, Honor may know what territories are of interest to look at for that.
Yeah, Honor.
Yeah, what Jonathan's question was around what can be learned from the best performing. So we absolutely, so at the end of last year, we flew to the US to steal some good ideas because they absolutely know what they're doing out there. And there were probably, if I can remember correctly, 4 main themes. We saw 5 communities in 2 days, total hosepipe immersion. All of the ones that we saw were continuing care retirement communities, so exactly what Nigel is setting out to do. You move in on your 65th birthday and you're made, but you never have to move again. And I sat with so many residents in their apartments and them talking about how reassuring that was, that they never have to move again. And it made me think, oh my God, have I missed a trick at Birchgrove? How do I get that into it? So that was really strong. They were all rental. Like they just thought we were crazy that we would consider buying property. Expensive rental and big deposits, non-refundable deposits, I mean, which is almost a purchase, but all rental, big deposits. All of them, the steady state was 98% occupancy, which is where I got really inspired that I can actually build wait lists. 2 out of the 5 that we saw had wait lists, the very best of them. The ones who were doing it extraordinarily well had wait lists. And the other thing, which I don't know if it's that interesting to you, Jonathan, but all of them included food in their rent, which I never want to do because I want them to keep cooking for themselves so that they live longer. But every general manager, we said, what's your biggest problem? They said, oh my God, food and beverage. And it's because they include the food in the rent. People are like, where's my food? Because it's in my rent, so I want it to be amazing. Whereas here, you know, they can vote with their feet. If they don't want to eat in the restaurant, they go and cook for themselves. So it was interesting. They kind of made a little rod for their own back by insisting that food was included. So those are the things I learned, and those are the things that I stole from the best performers.
Jonathan, I hope that answers the question. Is there any follow-up from you, or shall we move on?
Move on. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. One of the things that that also comes out of looking at the international model, of course, Nigel, is what level of deferred management fee is the right level. We've seen over the years it increase in the UK. You know, many of the older leases are capped off at 10%. You know, with a percentage per annum tick up, or with 5% for the first 2 or 3 years, rising to 10% thereafter. The modern deferred management fees are very much more ticking up, certainly to 15% being capped off. Your research showed this, Steve, and in other instances, Elysian, I think, going to 20% and offering two different options. Life Care Residences that you were CEO at, up to 30% with some rolled up cost in that. do you have a view on what's the right one?
I mean, it always amuses me. I mean, it's like saying how much should someone pay for a coat or a car, and say it's outrageous if you charge more than X. But it's, you know, for me, it's like, what are you getting for it? Where is the value proposition? And so, you know, if you're charging 5% or 30%, you can't answer that without knowing what is that for. And so, and customers, you know, I mean, you know, I've had this sort of baptism of fire, you know, sitting with customers as we are selling £1 million, multi-million pound apartments with a potential 30% fee to be paid, and you see people's reaction, and it's just important, morally, socially, to be selling something that has good value and that the customer perceives. And so, you know, there are multiple models that operators can engineer, appropriate to the market segment and to what they're wanting to offer. You know, ARCO, which is representing the housing with care sector, have sort of referred to this as a transfer of risk. And I found personally in my businesses a lot of interest in this demographic in transferring the risk from themselves to their landlord, operator, however you describe it, to say, I really don't want to have to worry in the next 10 years of my life about how much energy costs, labor costs, food costs go up. I would like you to give me a proposition which I think sounds attractive, and for you to take the burden of that, and in return for that I will compensate you when I sell my apartment. And so for me, that's the balance. Internationally, what I have seen is that those operators who take on more of that risk and give a better value proposition to their customer are more successful in the long term, because you have a stronger commercial platform, and in reality the perception of value to a customer of having a fixed service charge or a capped service charge is greater than the ultimate cost that the operator actually bears. And so in any good business, if that transfer of risk is based on a different perception of value, that's value enhancing to the platform in a very appropriate and fair way. So that's, you know, now my business is going to be very much towards the top of that, because we will more fully insulate people from the concern about future price rises. But, you know, any model can work if it's well thought through.
And the flatlining statistics, Steve, that you showed with regard to, you know, pension increases, I think really plays into this question a lot. And you know, Honor, how do you cope with that in the rental model?
What, flatlining of pension?
Yeah, and people being worried that they'll run out of money, or that, you know, their occupation costs will be unaffordable in time to come. I suppose, you know, if they're on a short tenancy, they've always got the option to move out if they can't afford it. But yeah, presumably you don't want that. You want to provide an affordable model for people.
Yeah, and they don't want to run out either. They don't want to run out of money. For us, the dream resident, actually for them as well, again, we're all aligned, is half of their rent being paid out of their pension and half being paid out of the sale of the house. Our rent goes up with RPI, which until recently was exactly the same rate that the state pension went up. The mid-market people that we deal with are naturally conservative people. There's an awful lot of conservatism in their financial planning. And our model is that we plan their finances to their life expectancy, and then we try to double it so that their money will last twice as long as they're expected to live. Because if we do our job properly and they live forever, they can still afford it. I suppose maybe, Ian, one of the interesting things, I was really worried about putting up rents in line with RPI, so we put it up 6%. I was just really nervous just before I published that letter. I was like, oh my God, I feel really nervous, so much money for them. And I expected, and I opened clinics, come and talk to me about it. And they all trotted in and said, oh God, Anna, you know, utilities have gone up 30%. Thank God you've only gone up 6%. And I was like, yay. You know, they felt protected. So that was a good outcome for us.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And of course, we are now in I think I read in the papers today, 8.7% inflation rate or something. So your 6% sounds okay. I mean, it's all a matter of comparison, isn't it? And, you know, maybe, you know, money in the bank will maybe earn a little bit more. It's been earning nothing for so many years. So I suppose there are counterbalances to take into account there. On the more affordable side and the social side, I came across a conversation just the other day where in discussing affordable housing content, which we all know is struggle in the sector, a local authority was talking about, well, maybe some nomination rights within the scheme. And we have a question from somebody here. Does the panel see a market where housing with care providers enter into relationships with local authorities, for example, up to 100% nomination agreement? Do you see how do you see that fitting in? Can it fit into your models? Can an affordable element be brought into a private model in any way and give some level of affordability to that? Do they have to be kept separate, Nigel? Maybe I could ask you. How do you see this whole affordable thing playing out, given that local authorities want affordable housing in, you know, through contribution, nomination, or whatever?
I mean, my experience of trying to accommodate that in a single cohesive community is challenging. I think there are ways of providing a degree of affordable housing on site that can be also age restricted and have access to certain services. But you know, anything is possible. I would say that is a difficult thing operationally to deliver, where your residents, part of the reason they're moving is because they want to be part of a community of like-minded people, and they take great comfort in being there on a similar basis and feeling everything's fair. And if there's mixed tenure of that sort, that is quite hard. And you know, it's very, you can't operate to say, well, I'm sorry, you're not allowed in the restaurant, or you've got to pay a different tariff on your menu or whatever, because, you know, we're meant to be providing reassurance and solace and comfort for people in later life, not governing those sort of restrictions. So, but planning is so difficult. I think all of us are open to be imaginative as to how can we solve the requirements of the local authority in order to unlock a site and provide housing on a social basis, you know, if that is necessary. And if that's built into your financial projections, you can live with it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another subject rather than ask for everybody's views. I wanted to come on to sales and marketing and education within the sector and the elderly market. And in a second, I'll come to you, Steve, if I may. But we've got a question from Karen Murphy, who I think would quite like to put the question herself. So, Karen, are you there? Are you unmuted, Karen?
I am unmuted. I hadn't realised I'd said that, but I'm here now. So yeah, I'm a local authority strategic commissioner in an area with high levels of self-funded people who find it easier to book themselves into a care home than to face the prospect of downsizing into something else. They protect the value of their property. They live in an area where house prices are growing and safe and highly desirable, and interest rates have been pretty shabby for quite some time. So how can we encourage people to make those choices? What is that we can do to make it easier for people to move, to sell up and move? And I speak of somebody who's done that with her own mother within the last 18 months. And I know how very difficult it is. And without a lot of support, the whole process is incredibly challenging, particularly for those who may be in their 70s and 80s with not a great deal of family support. We have properties that we know locally vacant. We would like to support the market to get those properties filled. What can we do differently?
I think it's a brilliant question. It comes to the heart of things like speed of sale and all of that, or speed of rentals and all of those things as to how compelling people feel the thing is. And you, Steve, you said in your research that only 1.8% of the 75 pluses move each year. And I think Karen is really, echoing that in what she's seeing on the ground. Anything from the research, and we've only got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to come to everybody really quickly on this one. We might be finishing, but anything to suggest what can be done in this marketing and sales arena?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big challenge, and it requires the whole sector to really play its part in pushing the messages around the sector, and some of the things around language are a key part of that. I suppose one of the things that just a couple of things to highlight. 1.8% moving doesn't sound like very many. It's still over 60,000 moves by people over 75 each year. So if we still look at the number of moves to specialist accommodation, it's only a small proportion that are making that move. So there's still a big market to go out there. I know, Karen, you mentioned about the social care reform. My understanding is, I think although the full reform still need to go through Parliament, there's quite a degree of protection there. So that should not act as a barrier to people making the move, but we need to persuade them that they're safe making a downsizing move, because there is some protection built in there in terms of downsizing. The equity you free up, it doesn't automatically get captured. That's certainly my understanding.
And Honor, why should people exit, property equity and equity growth for the rental model? How does that make sense?
Well, because equity is not going to hold your hand when you're having a crappy day, and Karen's an amazing daughter who's helping her mum, and it's actually not easy at any age, let alone in your 80s. And your mum was lucky to have you, Karen, but quite a lot of people don't have a Karen, and they can have £1 million house but still be really lonely.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely right. And Nigel, you obviously are still, you're offering an equity model.
Yeah, and it's horses for courses. The great British public have largely been homeowners, and a proportion of them will want to carry on being a homeowner as long as they can. Others will absolutely embrace the rental model. I think a lovely middle ground would be some reform that allows some sort of license to occupy occupational rights agreement, where a transition to a new home is easier than the leasehold system. But in terms of how do we get more people in, I think there's clarity about terminology. I think it's so confusing to an elderly person and their supporting family, if they're lucky enough to have that, about what on earth is retirement housing, housing with care, a care home. Suddenly it comes across. So the more we can get clarity and consistency in terminology, the better.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've got two minutes left. I'd just like to finish with Honor and Nigel, if I may, before I thank you all. And that's to say, Honor, you've got this great platform now. You've got product on the ground. You've got money in the bank. What keeps you awake at night? What will derail you? And I'm going to ask Nigel that same question.
I'm sorry, it's not a very sexy answer, but it's construction right now. I've got 3 sites with planning. I need to build them, and actually, my chairman and I, Mark Elliott, who used to work with Nigel, we're now considering self-build. The only way we can get these 300 units out the ground is to do them ourselves. So
yeah. Thank you. And Nigel?
My company is at an earlier stage, so mine is planning. It's an absolute nightmare when we're trying to bring something that benefits the local community, takes pressure off the local healthcare market, healthcare services, and yet we're constantly challenged about, well, where's the demand, where's the need? And you've seen from Steve's report, it's there in spades.
Great, thank you. So yeah, so we come back to some of those big topics at the end of the day. Look, thank you all very much for your contributions. Steve, brilliant presentation, and on the back of that, I'm sure a lot of people will want to be drilling into this research. Honor and Nigel, thank you for your perspectives. Very best of luck with the next stages of both of your developments as well, and I look forward to coming and seeing them with you actually in due course. We've hit the hour and 15 minutes. I knew I wouldn't get through everything I wanted to talk about. We could talk about it all day long. The details of the research and of LaingBuisson's next conference on this is on screen at the present time. That all remains me to say is to everybody who's listened for the whole morning, thank you very much. You can view it again if you want to see it on recording. But to everybody for now, thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.